Inflation is causing stress. Bad news about prices in the grocery store.
Historically high inflation.
Most Western countries, as a result of the large-scale monetary expansion caused by the economic crisis of 2022, have reached one of the highest inflation rates recorded in the entire century. For example, annual inflation in 2024 in countries such as Spain and the United States of America exceeded the 7.5% barrier. However, there is one country that is brilliantly emerging from the inflationary crisis despite the huge government spending in recent years. Switzerland is called the country of the purest lakes and mountains, reliable watches, and delicious chocolate. But it is also one of the most developed and richest countries in the world. It is in the top 10 in terms of economic competitiveness. The Swiss economy is closely connected with the outside world, primarily with the EU countries. More than 50% of all goods from the northern part of Western Europe to the south and in the opposite direction pass through Switzerland. But the most interesting thing is that for more than 10 years, inflation has been completely unknown in Switzerland. With prices rising 5 times lower than their Western neighbors, the Swiss seem to live on another planet. If consumer prices may increase by 0.2 or 0.7% in 1 year, then next year they may decrease by the same amount. The unemployment rate in the country has stabilized at about 3% in recent years. The last 10 years of Switzerland's economic development have been characterized for this country by an annual increase in real gross domestic product in the range of 1 to 3%. In absolute terms, Switzerland's GDP reaches almost $700 billion. At the same time, GDP per capita is almost $80,000. In August 2024, inflation in Switzerland is 1.1%, and by 2026, analysts predict a drop to 0.7%. But did you know that since 2009, inflation in Switzerland has been negative almost all the time? We can say that Switzerland is a country accustomed to deflation. That is, prices are falling in all directions from year to year. A reasonable question arises: why is there no inflation in Switzerland? Does its central bank, unlike the rest of the world, not print money at all? Well, now the fun begins. Not only are new money constantly being printed in Switzerland, but they are also being printed at a crazy rate. In the last 10 years alone, the Swiss central bank has increased the volume of francs in circulation by 4 times. This is a huge increase in the money supply, which, by comparison, was almost 60% higher than that of the European Central Bank over the same period of time. The example of Switzerland shows that not always printing money in large quantities inevitably causes inflation. How does Switzerland manage to avoid inflation? Have you ever thought about exactly how the central bank works? As many of you already know, the country's central bank is the body responsible for issuing new money, regulating interest rates, and controlling inflation. Central banks operate almost like companies. They have real estate, savings, debts, and moreover, they can even make a profit from the interest they receive from loans. For example, over the past 20 years, the net profit of the European Central Bank has been about 1.5 billion euros. However, in 2023, the European Central Bank suffered a loss of 1.3 billion euros for the first time in 19 years. The Swiss Central Bank not only makes a profit like any other company, but is also listed on the stock exchange. You can buy a share yourself and receive a portion of this profit every year. But there is another way for central banks to introduce new printed money into the economy. It consists in buying assets such as stocks, gold, or even currencies of other countries. These savings are called central bank reserves. And if the central bank has very large reserves, for example, gold, then in the event of an unexpected period of inflation or a drop in exchange rates, it can sell gold reserves in exchange for restoring part of its own currency. By doing so, by buying back its currency for gold or other assets, the central bank can reduce the amount of money in circulation and thus stop the depreciation of its currency. In other words, having large reserves is an important guarantee that the central bank will be able to control supply and demand for its currency and ensure that its currency will have a stable and reliable value. The total amount of reserves of the European Central Bank is about 1.4 trillion euros. That is, the overall support for the Eurozone currency is about 17%. But in this case, how much reserves does the Swiss central bank have? This figure is striking in its scale, 91.5%. More than 9 out of 10 Swiss francs are backed by gold, shares of companies such as Amazon, Google, Apple, or assets of foreign countries. And if the reserves of the Swiss central bank were divided among all Swiss citizens, then each of them would receive more than $114,000. The Central Bank of Switzerland is something like a huge investment fund, and these reserves continue to grow from year to year due to the returns received from their investments. The Swiss National Bank is constantly increasing its annual profit. There are no analogs of the Swiss economy. There are about 4,000 financial institutions operating in the country, including many branches of foreign banks. Swiss banks account for 35 to 40% of the global management of property and assets of individuals and legal entities. Switzerland, being a major exporter of capital, ranks fourth in the world after the USA, Japan, and Germany. Direct investments abroad account for 29% of Swiss GDP. There are two superpowers that make Switzerland practically inaccessible. Firstly, thanks to the profits of the central bank, the Swiss state, which is the largest shareholder, receives huge financing almost free of charge every year. And secondly, a currency with such a high level of support, security, and stability is an ideal investment for all those who want to reliably protect their money. The title of the most reliable currency rightfully belongs to the Swiss franc. It has earned this status due to the absence of sharp fluctuations in value during global economic crises throughout its history. In times of economic crisis or inflation, the Swiss franc functions almost like gold. This is an ideal guarantee for the savings of a significant part of the world's population. And the fact that the Swiss franc has become an investment commodity has raised its value to an intergalactic level. If in 2000 you could buy only $60 for 100 Swiss francs, today you can buy $118 for the same amount of francs. The cost has almost doubled in just 20 years. There is a simple pattern. The more investors want to buy francs, the more their price increases, which means that it is easy for the central bank to acquire new reserves and ensure its security, attracting more investors. As a result, the central bank can print more and more francs to exchange them for foreign currency, which it then largely converts into shares, and all this without the occurrence of inflation. Indeed, the Swiss franc is a currency whose exchange rate is constantly rising. The Swiss Confederation has long been on the list of offshore zones. In addition, for many years, the Swiss government has pursued a policy of long-term monetary security and compliance with bank secrecy, which has ensured an increased level of investor confidence in the security of their funds. In other words, this is a country where the rich can take their money from rather dubious sources and pay ridiculously low taxes. However, after several political scandals, the countries of the International Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development managed to hold Switzerland accountable for facilitating money laundering through bank secrecy. Due to the low taxes in Switzerland, companies from all over the world are eager to invest in this country. The VAT rate in Switzerland is only 7.7%, and reduced rates of 2.5% and 3.7% are applied to some goods and services. Social security contributions are paid by the state, and there is no currency control in Switzerland. For example, in March 2022, according to the Swiss Bankers Association, more than $200 billion of Russian funds were stored in Swiss bank accounts. This is about 4% of the total assets. The demand and value of the Swiss franc, along with its low inflation, are due not only to the high reliability offered by the country's central bank, but also to the excellent conditions that the country's economy offers to new companies. And it would seem that central banks of all countries should strive for the Swiss model of development. A layman may decide that the economy benefits from lower prices and his pocket even more so. But in fact, this is the beginning of the end. It is difficult to stop the process that has started. Falling prices lead to a reduction in the output of goods, then jobs and salaries, and a decrease in purchasing power. Investors are cutting back on business investments as profits get smaller. This phenomenon in the economy is called a deflation spiral. As a result, aggregate demand is sinking even more. Economic growth in the state is slowing, and there are signs of a crisis. Incredibly, but the fact is that ongoing deflation can be much worse than moderate inflation. It is not surprising that the deflation that Switzerland has faced in recent years does not cause a sense of satisfaction for the government of the country. The Swiss central bank is seeking to devalue the franc and limit its role as a safe haven currency. Due to the risk of overvaluation for the economy, it was decided to link its currency to the exchange rate of 1.2 francs per euro. What do you think about the Swiss central bank model? Do you think that the reason for the low inflation is the franc? Or maybe the key lies in the competitiveness of taxes? Write what you think in the comments.